Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are breaking down the incredibly complex and, let's be honest, really heated debate around a military conflict with Iran. We're going to deconstruct the arguments for it, the arguments against it, and the view from Tehran itself to really understand the war of narratives at the heart of all this.
Okay, so let's just dive right in. The central question hanging over this entire conflict sounds simple, but it has huge implications. Why? What is the ultimate goal here? Is the idea to kind of bully the current regime into compliance, or is it to get rid of it altogether? As we're about to see, the answers are anything but clear, and that shapes the debate on all sides. First up, let's explore the arguments in favor of military action. Now, this entire perspective is pretty much built on one central idea, that the Iranian regime is a clear and present danger that simply has to be confronted head-on. So, proponents of intervention, people like John Bolton, are basically arguing that, look, we've tried diplomacy, we've tried sanctions for decades, and it just hasn't worked. They believe the regime's core ideology is just unchangeable, and that makes its complete removal, regime change, not just one option, but the only option for long-term security. And this call for regime change, it's not just wishful thinking. It's really fueled by the belief that the government in Tehran is at its absolute weakest point in decades. The argument is that you've got this perfect storm brewing. The economy is a mess, wrecking daily life. The government is deeply unpopular with its massive youth population. And you have all this simmering discontent among women and various ethnic groups that makes the regime uniquely vulnerable to a push from both the inside and the outside. Now, what's really interesting here is how this perspective reframes the whole conflict. It's not just about stopping a future nuclear threat. For veterans like Matt Tardeo, this is personal. This is about payback. He points directly at Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, and holds them responsible for the deaths of 1 in every 5 or 6 U.S. service members in the region. So for them, a score needs to be settled. And finally, the case for war goes way beyond Iran's borders. Proponents point to Iran's funding of proxy groups all over the Middle East, and even assassination attempts on European and American soil as proof of a global threat that they argue just can't be contained anymore. Okay, so let's flip the coin and look at the counter-argument. This perspective sees the conflict not as some necessary act of defense, but as an illegal war of aggression, one that's built on a foundation of shifting and, frankly, incoherent excuses. Right, so you have critics like investigative journalist Aaron Marte who argue that the justification for war is a constantly moving target, and that makes it a transparent crime. First, they said the reason was an imminent nuclear threat. Then, suddenly, it was about protecting Israel. Then it was about ballistic missiles. This constant changing of the story, they argue, doesn't just look suspicious, it completely demolishes the credibility of the entire operation. And this is where that deep skepticism really kicks in. Opponents are drawing this direct and pretty chilling parallel to the lead-up to the Iraq War. They're hearing the exact same rhetoric about imminent threats and the need for regime change, and they are terrified it's going to lead to the same result: decades of instability and all kinds of unforeseen consequences. The case against intervention is also built on the devastating and immediate human cost. Beyond all the political arguments, critics point to these harrowing reports coming from the ground. And one of the most shocking claims is that an early act of aggression was an attack on a girls' school in Iran that reportedly killed 165 children. That number, for opponents of the war, just crystallizes the whole argument about the tragic price paid by ordinary people. And this leads to a really crucial distinction for critics: the idea that this is not a defensive war of necessity, but an offensive war of choice. Journalist Omar Bod really spells out the belief that this conflict isn't actually about American security, but is instead being fought to serve the political ambitions of allied leaders in the region. And this really gets to the heart of the disagreement, doesn't it? It all comes down to who you see as the primary aggressor. One side points to Iran's huge network of proxy militias causing chaos in neighboring countries. The other side points to Israel's ongoing occupation of Palestinian and Syrian land as the real root of the conflict. Both sides see the other as the true source of instability. But what about the view from inside Iran? To get the full picture, we have to try and understand how this whole thing looks from their side of the battlefield. To even begin to understand Iran's position, you have to start with the sheer military imbalance. Just look at these numbers. The U.S. defense budget is nearly 60 times bigger than Iran's. This staggering difference is key. It shapes every single strategic decision Tehran makes, and it forces them to rely on things like proxy forces, which we talked about earlier, instead of a direct fight. It also fuels this really powerful narrative of a nation just trying to fend off a global superpower.
So from Tehran's perspective, which you hear from people like Professor Mohammad Marandi, this is a premeditated attack by a sinister and dishonest enemy. In this telling, Iran isn't the aggressor, it's the defender, prepared for a conflict that it sees as just the latest chapter in a decades-long war that's been waged against it by the United States. And this view just completely rejects that Western narrative of a weak, unpopular regime about to collapse. Instead, it paints a picture of a nation that's actually unified by foreign aggression, with people taking to the streets not to overthrow their government, but to protest the attacks against their country.
Of course, the Western view immediately pushes back on this. The challenge here from Piers Morgan really questions that whole idea of popular support. He's implying that real dissent is impossible, and that any show of unity is just forced by a repressive government where you can't actually speak freely.
But Morandi's response completely reframes the question. He basically argues that demanding someone criticize their own government while it's under attack is a luxury that only the aggressor can afford. He portrays the demand itself as a tool of the criminal regime that's actively bombing his people. So, where does that leave us? You've got three completely clashing realities, three different stories about the same conflict, and absolutely no clear path forward. So, what on earth is the endgame?
Ultimately, you can boil this entire, massive, complicated debate down to this one crucial distinction. Was this a war of necessity, fought to stop an existential threat, or was it a war of choice, launched for political gain? Your answer to that question pretty much determines which narrative you believe. And what's so striking is that from every single perspective, you're left with this long trail of unanswered questions. What is the actual goal here? Is there any plan for who would govern a post-conflict Iran? What happens if tons of Iranian civilians rise up and get slaughtered? And why, if this was all planned, was there no clear strategy to get American citizens out of the region?
And that's the real takeaway from all this. This isn't just a conflict of armies, it is a profound war of narratives. And when each side is operating from a completely different reality, built on its own set of facts and its own moral framework, the very definition of victory becomes almost meaningless, leaving us all to question the true nature of the conflict itself.